Heater my son's funeral, his wife said, "There's nothing left for you," so I walk out quietly, with the deed, the title, and $3.50 he'd secretly left in my name. I stand at the back of the chapel, in California, cloaked in modest black, a quiet presence that seems almost invisible, yet every laugh, every whisper ricochets off my senses like a chorus. The scent of lilies clings to the air, but cannot reach the hollowness inside me. I feel every glint of mourning velvet and muffled condolences as if they were mirrors reflecting my grief back at me. My son is gone, Daniel is gone, and here I am, present but erased, present but unacknowledged. I am a silent silhouette, a mother in black, moved to the margins of her own sorrow. The chapel doors creak, and Emma sweeps in with hesitant confidence, her heels clicking on the tile like a mock heartbeat announcing her arrival. She enters on the arm of a man I do not know, dressed in a suit too sharp, too confident, someone who belongs to ambition and greed. He carries himself like he owns everything in the room, scanning for approval in a sea of mourners and calculating eyes. Emma's face is composed, too composed, her lips pressed into a smug line that tells me she is thankful for my silence because now the stage is hers. I watch her approach the front pew with deliberate grace. No one offers me a seat here. She bows imperceptibly to the mourners, the room tensing before he kisses her on the cheek, a public display that tastes like betrayal. I swallow around grief. Emma's voice, low and bright, drips venom as she leans toward me. "Your son is dead," she says, crisp as a blade, "and now it is my time. There is nothing left for you." Her words hang in the hush, sharper than any eulogy, cutting me deeper than loss itself. This is more than arrogance. It is the final argument in a war I did not start. The man's eyes meet mine, and his gaze is a disdainful sneer, accusing me of intruding on a triumph they have styled as victory. For a moment, I am trapped in the darkness of his contempt, the awareness that my sorrow is seen as a nuisance. I do not cry, not yet. Tears would speak of vulnerability. Instead, I rise, each movement deliberate, measured, as though my body has finally remembered how to walk. I glide past the pulpit, past the hush, past the floral arrangements that do nothing to soften brutal betrayal. Emma flutters a look of disgust, and I step out. She calls behind me in a voice dipped in cruel poise, "Do not sleep here tonight, Mother. You make things worse in places where decorum is required." The words linger like a broken promise as I exit the chapel's doors. Outside, the air is still. The sun catches on a headstone in the courtyard, turning it golden. I breathe in and out, silent and steady. I am no longer inside, but still shattering. I reach into the pocket of my shawl and withdraw an envelope sealed with thick crimson wax. The seal is unbroken, the emblem unrecognizable except to me. It is Daniel's, pressed into history. This seal, this envelope, is neither sentimental nor antique. It is a silent ultimatum, a promise delivered in Daniel's final act of love. I hold it, warm in my hand, pulsing with things unsaid, unshared, and unresolved. I walk home slowly, past mourners who do not turn to look, past the hush of lilies, past the empty chairs and the fading scent of incense. My steps are deliberate. I clutch the envelope close as though it were the only warm pulse left in my life. I do not look back. I do not wish to see their celebration of loss. When I reach home, I go straight to my room. The walls hold memories of a life before grief, before betrayal, photographs of Daniel as a boy with shy smiles, paintings done in happy moments, tools for the leathercraft I used to practice in quiet evenings. I sit down at the small wooden desk and place the envelope before me. Then I do what life has taught me. I unwrap it slowly by pressing the wax with my thumbnail, listening to the crack as if to the last breath of Daniel's voice. Inside is a single sheet of paper and a USB drive. I do not open the paper, not yet. Instead, I press the play button on my tablet, plugging in the drive. The screen flickers to life. There is Daniel, pale against the hospital backdrop, his voice weak but unbroken. "Mother," he says, "by the time you see this, I will be with your husband. Please do not grieve. Everything I have, My house, my investments, my savings, I have transferred to your name, and by the time you know, it will be done. Do not let Emma have a single cent. I classified her actions. She betrayed me. His eyes flicker to someone off camera, fear mixing with sorrow, and he finishes, no apology means more. Live, mother, live in your own name. I love you forever. And then the video ends. I sit at the desk. The envelope is open. My eyes close. I fold the paper. I cradle that memory, that impossible sacrifice. I breathe, and I finally let tears come, quiet and cleansing, tracing paths down my cheeks. Outside the window, the late afternoon light holds on to the day as long as it can, and I hold on to Daniel with every drop of grieving gratitude I still have breathing inside me. I used to be known as a leather artisan, crafting bags and belts with my own hands in the evenings, when the California sun finally let go of the day. My fingers knew every curve, every stitch, every fold. I once bundled up my first paycheck from a small export order, so proud I could hardly breathe. I had sold one of my bespoke leather wallets to a boutique in San Francisco, hand-cut, hand-dyed, hand-stitched, and the price affixed to it helped me feed my son through college. I never charged my son back, not for tuition, not for food, not even for the countless tutoring sessions I gave him when he struggled through math. I only hoped he would grow up kind. But Emma, my daughter-in-law, had a different view. I laid out a series of finished wallets on the kitchen table once, newly oiled and smelling rich with tanned leather, and Emma looked down at them as if they were clay pots from the dollar store. She said, loud enough for half the neighbors to hear, "Handmade leather looks like market trash. Who even uses that anymore?" I forced a smile, nodded, and packed the pieces away. The sting grew inside me like acid, not for my ego, but for the memory of the loving craftsmanship I had once poured into every stitch. Another time I painstakingly embroidered a leather handkerchief for my granddaughter's birthday. The baby pink stitching was so delicate, each flower petal soft with love. Emma saw me hand it over and threw it onto the couch. Handkerchief? How antiquated. We live in the 21st century, Mother. No one wipes their nose with handkerchiefs anymore. She laughed. My granddaughter, wide-eyed, touched the soft embroidery, but Emma brushed her hand away and told her to play with her phone. I left the room quietly, the handkerchief catching the afternoon light, just a fragile echo of a tradition no one valued. Then there was the local artisan fair. I took a whole collection of my best work, leather bracelets, card holders, a custom tote with inlaid floral pattern, and everything she'd taught me about sourcing fair trade dye. I brought them there, hoping to show my granddaughter that creation is better than consumption. But I overheard Emma whispering to her friends, "Who would look at old-fashioned leather art? That is so out of date." They laughed. Only one passerby paused and touched the embossed petals on the tote, nodding and buying a bracelet. That was enough to keep me going. All these moments tended to spin themselves into my memory like threads unraveling in the night. I remembered spending hours stitching that wallet that saved Daniel's tuition. I remembered the sacrifice, selling one piece of my craft for a price higher than I ever imagined. I thought Daniel would remember, but he never mentioned it. After Daniel's diagnosis hit, aggressive, fast-moving suffer, I had sold what I could to keep him comfortable. That final wallet sale put us over the edge enough for a treatment his insurance denied. He was weak by the time he held that worn leather piece in his hand and pressed my tear-wet cheek, saying, "I love you, Mom," the way only he could when life was slipping away. Those words did not sound petulant or heroic. They were real and heavy in my chest. But Emma never referenced that moment. She never spoke of it. It never made it to any authority or conversation. It simply remained a memory between a dying child and his mother. Now I stand amid grief that has been commandeered by another woman's ambition. That woman, my son's wife, treated my life's work as though it were little more than paper to be thrown away. The irony cleaves me in two. A career built of love, deemed worthless in the eyes that should have seen it as the inheritance of devotion. That day I closed my eyes and let the memory sink in. Every stitch, every scent of tanning oil, the quiet nail filing in the quiet evenings, the thrill of exporting those tiny orders, the modest pride that filled me. When I finally opened my eyes again, I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was fortified. Everything I had built with my hands, everything my son stood for, including his final act of love that he had confided into that sealed envelope, was intact. My work, uncelebrated and ridiculed, still tethered me to the truth that I had never stopped offering the craft of care, and that some small thing inside me remained unbroken by mockery. I left the ashes of that display table behind, and carried those memories with a quiet pride that could not be erased by shallow laughter or polished sneers. In the stillness that followed, I thought of all the lives like my granddaughter's that could be touched by the skills becoming rare, and I knew that whatever meager value the world placed on them, I would keep them alive, quietly, with the same precision I once pressed into every stitch. In that moment, I folded the shame until it became a shield, and something quiet but fierce kindled inside me, the knowledge that preservation carried a power greater than prestige. I entered my son's lawyer's office that afternoon with a heart both heavy and oddly steady, holding a sealed envelope in my gloved hand that felt like the weight of everything I had lost and everything he still gave me. And when I handed it over, the lawyer looked at me with eyes that waited for explanation, but I only nodded and said, "This is for me," hoping that mattered more than words. The envelope was opened with deliberate care. The wax seal cracked softly like a sigh, and inside there was only a USB drive with Daniel's handwriting on it. Final message from Daniel Reynolds. My fingers trembled, but I did not pull away. I held it, and I felt a tremor of life in his handwriting. Alive even now. I asked them to play it for me, and the lawyer cleared his throat, his voice attentive but gentle, saying, "Ma'am, are you sure?" I nodded firmly and said, "I am my son's mother. I need to hear his voice." The video flickered to life on the screen. There was Daniel, gaunt from illness, laying on a hospital bed, with tubes and the faint rhythm of machines behind him. His voice was quiet, tender, fractured by pain, but laced with clarity. "My beloved mother," he began, his eyes steady on the camera, "by the time you see this I will be with your husband. Please do not grieve for me. Everything I had I have made sure is yours. My house, my investments, every dollar I could touch." Pause, his breath trembled. "I know this is hard, but I need you to know Emma betrayed me. She poisoned me bit by bit in ways I trusted her not to until it was too late." He closed his eyes briefly and then continued. "She will expect to benefit, but I do not want her to benefit from a single cent." I closed my eyes and clenched my teeth to keep from sobbing. "I love you, Mother. Please do not seek revenge. Live for both of us." Then the screen went black, and for a moment all I could hear was my own breath, quick and ragged. I staggered, and the lawyer stepped forward, worry in his eyes. But I shook my head and whispered, "No, let me just—" I fled the room and pressed my hands into my eyes as tears, long held back, burst through. I sank to the floor and cried until the exact shape of his final words, his final breath, became etched in my mind like unbreakable crystal. My foolish child, I thought, my precious foolish child, dead and still looking out for me. When I finally stood, I said aloud, my voice trembling but clear, "My foolish child, he is dead and he still cares for me." And in that moment I knew. I held the deed, the title, the $3,500,000 0 cents he placed in my name, and the proof of the betrayal. I held everything to address his final wishes and uncover the truth, to protect what he loved and expose what hurt him, and I would do that with the calm certainty of someone carrying not just grief, but justice. I did not answer Emma's second call, not immediately. I let it go to voicemail, with its hollow ring echoing like a specter of confrontation I did not want to face. She called again. Her voice was theatrical, as if rehearsed. "Mother, you must come back to settle things. We need to finalize everything, from the funeral details to the legal papers. For Daniel?" I stood by the window, looking at the late afternoon sky before I spoke into the phone with calm clarity. "I will come. If by that you mean I should come to learn the truth?" She hung up. The words hummed in the hall and then in my heart. That evening, I dressed quietly in black, the fabric cool and familiar, and I drove to the house where Daniel and Emma had lived. I climbed the steps and knocked. One slow, deliberate tap. The door swung open before anyone could say a word. Emma stood inside, dressed in a smart dress, hair perfect, her posture narrowed into curves of defiance. her lips pressed into a mask that said, "Watch me." Family members lurked nearby, whispering about division or inheritance or drama, barely masking anticipation. She held up a legal pad with a line to sign, a waiver of inheritance rights and final estate documents. My chest tightened, but I looked at her through steady eyes and asked, "You wish me to sign over what Daniel spent so many sleepless nights building?" Her face contorted. She said, with a look of contempt that slammed harder than words, "Just sign it, or I will have the attorney do it in probate. You have no claim, Mother." The room closed in with polite eyes and decorum. Then I reached for the inner pocket of my coat and withdrew the USB drive. Once it was in my hand, I pressed play without hesitation on the speaker the lawyer had kept discreetly placed there. The video came to life in the hush. It was a clandestine camera angle of Emma and her lover in the kitchen, arguing in low voices not meant for anyone else's ears. One voice, cold with calculation, said, "He will never know it's poison in his tea if we stagger the dose." The other laughed, harsh and mirthless. The audio was clear, damning. My heart slowed as the family's faces drained color. Emma's lips parted, her eyes widening in silent horror. Her lover lurched backward, a flash of panic breaking through his arrogance. The hush became an avalanche of truth. I stood, unwavering, and spoke. Each word carried the weight of betrayal and love. I no longer need a cross to tell who died on it. Silence swallowed my statement whole. The man bolted backwards. Emma collapsed into a chair, her composure in tatters. For a heartbeat, the room held nothing but that single sentence I had spoken, ringing louder than thunder. Then Emma screamed. "You are a murderer!" she cried. But I shook my head. I just said, quietly, "No, your actions were. And now the truth is here." She clutched her throat like life was slipping through her fingers. Her lover was already disappearing toward the back door, hedging his way out. I turned and walked toward my car. As I passed the small crowd, their faces were pale shells of anticipation. Whispers began to rise. Did she just accuse them of murder? Where's the police? I did not look back. Outside, the evening air was heavier than usual. I walked out and paused by the car. I pressed the drive in my pocket again, the small device holding my son's final message and the poison plot. I whispered to myself, "He made sure things were in your hands, Mother." Then I drove off. Over the next 2 weeks, the legal wheels turned swiftly. While Emma's attorneys petitioned for probate, Daniel's sealed will and signed property transfer took precedence in court, a quiet assertion of his final wishes. In the rearview mirror, I saw Emma standing in the doorway, her back to me, hands clutching her face. I felt no joy in her anguish. I felt only the sanctified calm of grief defended by truth. I had no need to scream. I had exposed the lie with only one sentence. I had revealed the heart of evil with the quiet proof of deception. And I knew now, with gritty clarity, that the estate, the house, the savings, they were all his to bequeath, and in the mechanics of justice and love, they were mine, rightfully, and he had left them to me. I drove home through the fading light, each mile bringing me closer to a life I once knew before grief became the only inheritance I held. The small garage, once my workshop, waited silently, tools lined neatly in wood-grain rows and leather scraps hanging like tawny ribbons. I stepped inside, the scent of oil and aged leather rising like a memory I thought had been buried forever. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the sudden rush of recognition. This was the cradle of my livelihood, and the seed of every sacrifice I made for my son's future. I set down the sealed envelope that had held his parting message, the deed, the USB, the video, everything, and I turned toward my tools. I picked up a worn leather hide, one I had bought for the academy, heavy, vegetable-tanned, warm to the touch. I traced my fingers along a fading pattern I had once created, smelled the leather that had smelled like promise, like possibilities I had aimed to sell at craft fairs. The quiet of the garage swallowed me and released something dormant. Purpose. I began working. I skived the edges with deliberate strokes. I dyed a scrap for testing. I hammered in rivets as though I were stitching time back together. This was my resurrection in craft. Hours slipped, the overhead light blinking from dusk to darkness. By the time I stopped, there were 2 wallets, clean, precise, hands still steady from many nights of labor. I gripped them, one for display, one for not sales, not now. I set out to find meaning beyond the courtroom's grim corridors. I thought of the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, a nonprofit that promotes folk and traditional art. I remembered how they offered grants and ran exhibitions celebrating traditions so many only nod along to. The next morning, I mailed a letter, attaching images of my craft, and a note explaining who my son was and who I am. I asked if they would consider exhibiting my work to show that artistry remains a silent testament of life, even when one is forced from inheritance by betrayal. A week later, I received a letter back, brief but warm, inviting me to present at a local folk art gala and even offering a small stipend. My breath caught, because this was not just recognition, but an invitation to breathe again, to show others that my craft held stories worth telling. But the law still demanded a reckoning. Emma had begun slander campaigns, and though I had video proof, I told my lawyer, I will not make this my legacy. He raised his eyebrows, but I smiled. Let the law do its work. I need space to create life again, not fight old ghosts. So we executed the deed, settled the estate quietly, and transferred ownership cleanly. No public battles, just legal acknowledgement of Daniel's wishes and my rights. Then came the eager phone calls, youth centers wanting to host workshops, community colleges asking if I would teach. I called the first response Confronting, a youth program for teens facing hardships, eager for vocational skills and art exposure. I offered to teach a monthly class, no fee, materials donated, a bench for them to create beside me. I found myself standing before a circle of teenagers, hands flinching when they touched the leather for the first time. Their eyes widened when I showed them how to thread a needle, how to crease and burnish, how patience becomes precision. Their laughter filled the studio. I demonstrated how a half-inch stitch, done carefully, holds stronger than anything rushed. I told them stories of Daniel, how he loved his first wallet because I told him it was made by hand, with hope. They listened. One kid, shy and quiet, said, I want to make something real, not just look at a screen. I placed leather in his hands. Weeks passed. The class grew. I taught them carving letters, reinforcing belts, dye techniques, and they taught me something I had lost. Community. I didn't charge them. I offered breakfast burritos donated by a local cafe. If they made something beautiful, we photographed it on my old phone, posted it to social media, and reached out to small boutiques to consider selling it. All proceeds back into materials for the next class. I opened my home occasionally to them. My garage and yard became a humble atelier, full of energy and hope, and somewhere in that creative hum I found that grief could transform into guidance, betrayal into teaching, a broken inheritance into community investment. I did not know whether Emma's legal actions continued. I did not care anymore. I had learned that justice did not need to echo in court. It could whisper in a craft classroom where a teen learned how to make something belong. And if someone asked why I taught for free, I would say, because my son wanted me to live. And by teaching, I keep living. A few months later, I mailed a check from the small proceeds to the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, enough for a grant in Daniel's name to preserve one local artisan tradition each year. I wrote, because life is more than fading shadows. It is the hands that hold what was once lost. And I signed, Martha Reynolds, artisan, mother, survivor. I look around the workshop now and see wallets with initials, bags with faded lines, belts with personality. I see traces of students learning how to shape what matters. I know I am not rich, not yet, but I have everything I need. My story, my craft, the quiet beat of renewal. That was what he left me. That is what I still build, in leather, in legacy, in love. I heard about the lawsuit through my lawyer's voice on the phone, flat and confused. Emma had filed a complaint accusing me of copying and stealing artisan designs. Emma's lawsuit was less about design and more a furious guard of her claim to Daniel's assets, a strategic move to discredit my genuine craft and pressure me into relinquishing any legal ties. The accusation was as absurd as it was cruel, like a bat swinging wildly in the dark. They used social media to amplify it, brandishing images of my leatherwork alongside bastardized knockoffs with tacky borders and sloppy stitching, and they broadcast headlines, Velvet Granny stole my branding, artisan or imitator. My name became a meme overnight. Emma had spun me into a laughingstock. I watched the comments roll in. Grandma have a midlife crisis? Art theft from your daughter-in-law's stepmom? Every barb stung, but I did not speak. I did nothing public. Instead, I sat quietly in my garage, stroking the edge of a dyed leather strip I had just cut, and I allowed calm determination to rise through the insult. I compiled proof. Photos of me teaching kids free leatherworking classes. Invoices showing I had purchased dye and leather overseas ethically. Thank you letters from the youth center and the grant acceptance letter from the Alliance for Traditional Arts. My lawyer posted a calm rebuttal online. These are records of an educator and artisan. Any claim of theft is baseless. The posts took a day to circulate, then resonated. Messages landed in my inbox. I have your back, artisan granny. Ignore the hate and keep making art. The scale had shifted. Meanwhile, law enforcement quietly began investigating Emma. They had the wired confession, the evidence of poisoning, the will forgery, the admission that she coordinated with her lover, all of it. I did not advertise her crimes. I didn't post about them. But the case dragged into court. The day Emma was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and fraud, the room in the courthouse was packed. She stood behind her attorney, makeup perfect, but the cameras with their lenses fixed on her cracked the facade. And when the narrative broke nationwide, Emma, the Black Widow of California, I sat quietly on the gallery bench, listening to news anchors read the indictment out loud. Poisoning spouse, conspiracy to kill, property fraud. The moniker haunted her across airwaves and social platforms, an irrevocable label. Her lover was arrested the same day. The pair who had once paraded their triumph turned into fugitives in the headlines, desperately filing motions for bail and leaking sobbing declarations. The world no longer laughed at me. They were too busy recoiling from her betrayal. Throughout it all, I stayed home. I continued my classes. I greeted every student with a smile and a clean workstation. In the daytime, I taught them how to trace patterns. At night, I sewed quietly by lamplight. I never gloated, never claimed revenge. A mother's justice, I learned, was quieter, woven into tenderness, not headlines. The newspapers balanced out. The local paper that once ran Emma's diatribes now ran a spread. From heartbreak to legacy, how Martha Reynolds is building community, one stitch at a time. They came to photograph the workshop, leather shards, small hands learning art, Martha guiding them with firm but gentle hands. She had become a local hero, a soft warrior for truth. Emma's properties were seized under probate, her bank accounts frozen, her lawyer withdrew from public commentary, avoiding the glare. The Black Widow label stuck, a cautionary tale of betrayal and poetic justice. I did not dance triumphantly. I did not collect followers. I watched the justice system do its work, not for me, but for Daniel, who left the roadmap, and step by step I walked forward, with compassion, with purpose, with my son's final message as compass. I bought back the house, not as an act of vengeance, but as a soft reclamation. I signed the papers quietly in the lawyer's office, then walked through the front door where Daniel once lived with Emma. The walls were still bare, the rooms echoing absence. I breathed in the dusty calm and thought, here is home again, but this time with purpose. I restored the house slowly. I kept the beams, patched the floor, sanded the windows. I painted walls in soft pastels so that the afternoon light would dance gently, not glare. I turned the living room into a gallery with shelves of leatherwork and photos of my students. I retrofitted the garage into a studio, leaving space for tools and talents to be born anew. For the bedrooms, I furnished simple but welcoming furniture, second-hand chairs, hand-stitched curtains that let dappled light filter through, and rugs that spoke warmth underfoot. With the house ready, I renamed it in my mind, and later, officially, the House of Quiet Mothers. Its mission? To be a sanctuary for women like me, women who bore the weight of love, who were cast aside when they could no longer bear grief in silence. I applied for nonprofit status, secured funding through community grants, and partnered with a local organization that helped older women re-enter society with dignity. The day of the opening, I stood by the front door wearing a simple dress and an apron stitched with leather scraps. I watched as guests arrived, women who had lost their families, neighbors, volunteers. Each one was tired, wary, but hopeful. I called their names, offering my hands. Every visitor would receive as they entered a handmade leather wallet stamped with the words, "From the hands of someone they once called a burden." One woman, her hands trembling, accepted hers and whispered, "You see me." Another traced the lettering and whispered, "I feel safe." The air in the room felt hushed, sacred. In the back, I set up a workshop where women could learn leathercraft. My students, including some of the teens, guided older women as they learned to stitch and texture, to crease edges. The room was alive with quiet work and gentle laughter, the hum of telling hands, not shouting voices. The gallery held samples, but most of the space was for creation, connection, companionship. I listened as these women asked questions. Is the leather safe for arthritis? Can I learn even now? And I answered with patience. I showed them how to hold the needle, how to pace the stitch. I demonstrated how a simple tool could transform empty time into meaningful purpose. Outside, in the backyard, there was a small garden with plants Daniel had once wanted to grow, lavender and mint, rosemary and thyme, healing aromas for healing hearts. And there was a bench where women could sit and talk, or sit in silence if that was what they needed. The local paper came that day. A reporter asked me, "What do you hope this place becomes?" I paused, looking around at faces, learning that they still matter. I said, "Home, again, for those the world forgot. A place where quiet love rebuilds what grief tried to destroy." Later, on my porch, I watched the sun dip down. I held a cup of tea. A young volunteer asked, "Will you ever sell your craft?" I shook my head softly. "No. Here it is passed on." I looked at the wallets on the table inside. I thought of Daniel's words about living in my name. I breathed in the hum of purpose. The house stood not loud, but comforting. I did not rebuild just a home. I rebuilt what Daniel trusted me to remember about compassion and creation, and as twilight settled, I knew his quiet legacy was living, and the house of quiet mothers was its heart. The world outside was draped in morning light. It was the first anniversary of Daniel's passing. A knot had sat in my chest since sunrise, not grief exactly, but the pull of absence. I turned on the small TV in my workshop, a familiar ritual, and pressed play on the final video Daniel had recorded from his hospital bed. His face appeared soft and distant, but his eyes were steady. "Mother," he said, voice thin but clear, "you cared for me my whole life, even once I had left this world. Thank you for being my strength." He paused, laying down as though catching his breath. "Live, Mother, live for both of us." Tears fell freely, warm and rhythmic, each one a memory unfurling. I whispered into the silent room. He cared for me, even when he had no breath left. In that flicker of memory, I understood. Love's echo can outlive death. I pressed pause and sat still, letting grief and pride intertwine. My workshop was quiet. The leather scraps lay around us, but none cut as sharply as memory. I pressed the play button again, listening to his voice tenderly choose his last words. My grief swelled, not in panic, but in recognition of something that had not died. His love carried on living through me. I rose and walked to the small altar I'd set for today. A framed photograph of Daniel laughing, the exile of sorrow replaced by a breath of bittersweet joy. I knelt before it, voice clothed in sorrow that was still strength. People don't truly lose their children, they lose the image they cherished. I laid a leather rose at the frame, crafted from scraps, simple, sturdy. One of the attendees at the memorial for the house volunteers, a young woman named Maria who had grown close to me, stepped forward and said quietly, "You are living in his place, ma'am." Her words were not accusation, they were truth. I felt the weight of them calibrate me. In that moment I realized I was not surviving for me, I was living for both of us. Later that day, I stood before a small gathering of community members who had come to honor Daniel's memory. I held one of my handmade leather bookmarks, simple and smooth, embossed with a quote, "Love does not end, it transforms." I looked at the faces measuring me, measuring themselves. Then I spoke. I was once defined by my grief, a mother betrayed by silence and hatred. Now I carry forward love by remembering what matters. I offer this message to the world. You do not need blood to be called son or daughter. And I, just needing to offer my smile again, is all that remains priceless. The crowd nodded. I felt their hearts open. The room held quiet reverence, not pity. In the days that followed, people wrote to me. Some told stories of lost children, of mothers left behind by grief. Others shared how learning leathercraft gave them something to hope for, something to build. I never sought fame. I sought belonging. And over this year, it has grown, not in the noise of headlines, but in the slow flowering of connection. That night I lit a candle and placed it beside Daniel's photograph. The flame trembled, touching his face in gold, as though continuing his quiet voice. I watched it burn and whispered, "Your voice lives in every hand I guide, every stitch I make, every life I hold." Outside, the house of quiet mothers stood calm under moonlight. Inside, hearts that were once silent discovered a strong beat moving again. I closed my eyes and thought, I am not alone. He is not lost. I breathed out, steady and full. I am living. If this story touched something quiet in your heart, then you understand. Justice doesn't always arrive in the courtroom. Sometimes it walks on quiet feet. Sometimes it speaks with a mother's voice. If you've ever been cast aside, silenced, or underestimated, know this. Your story still matters. And here on Grandma True Stories, we remember. Out loud. So if you want more true stories from the quietest woman in the room, stories of betrayal, survival, and quiet revenge, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens. Thank you for being here.